In 2020, California made some new laws that will mandate all cars be electric by 2035. No fossil fuels, no smog, no carbon emissions, for climate change. Yes, of course, that's only 13 years away, but don't worry, they are going to phase it in nice and slow and give people some time to adjust. This will also give a nice cushion of time to build up an infrastructure to support all of these new electric cars. As I just stated, this law was announced in 2020, and parts of it take effect this week, actually a few days ago. This part of the phased rollout dictates that 35% of all new cars sold in California must be electric. This starts now, but they must be fully compliant by 2026. Yep, 4 years to make 35% of all new vehicles electric. According to current estimates, that's about double the number of electric cars currently on the road. After reading several articles about this, I can't find the punishment part of the law. Like, what happens if manufacturers don't sell 35% electric vehicles? People just don't buy enough. What happens to enforce this? Or, phrased correctly, how will they punish you for not buying the cars that they demand you buy? Now, there are a few exceptions to this. For example, this does not prevent private sales of used vehicles, and it does not prevent buying a car from another state and getting it registered in California. However, I will speculate that this may change sooner or later, especially the buying somewhere else and moving it back to California part. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, stated in a recent press conference that this was important, they're making bold steps, blah, blah, blah. This new law will be a means to reduce the amount of smog-induced pollution in the air, which will improve the state's air quality. That is the worst in the U.S.? What? I know that California is heavily populated, but they have had the strictest auto emissions for decades, and they still have the worst pollution of all the states? It kind of reminds me of how Chicago has the strictest gun laws, but all that murder. Probably just a coincidence. Nothing to see here. Anyway, the program keeps ramping up so that in 2030, 68% of all new vehicles need to be electric, and then 100% by 2035. Some automakers have raised some questions. At this point, they don't have any idea of how they will meet this deadline, and if there are actually enough people willing to buy these electric cars to meet the milestones. The average price of an electric car is still around $65,000. If that's the average price, half of them are more expensive than that. Plus, there's a 6-month wait to get a Tesla. They can't even make them fast enough with supply chain delays and what have you. So a few issues immediately jump out. There are just not enough charging stations. Not even close. Plus, they're slow. Just yesterday, I had to take a 450-mile road trip to get supplies for my company. I absolutely could not wait for them to be delivered, so I jumped in my truck and I got them. It took me all day, drive there, drive back, but that trip would be impossible in an EV. They just don't have the range to tow a loaded trailer over a mountain range, and recharging can take hours. So we're also getting really low on lithium to make all of these high-capacity batteries. Plus, they're not lasting as long as originally intended. Some of the older EVs are getting a fraction of their original capacity and range. Now, the last part is many people just don't want them. I don't want one. This may be a conspiracy theory, and I'm not afraid of that term, but an all-electric vehicle can be shut down at any time by a sophisticated hacker. We do have foreign enemies that want to do harm to us. Or even worse, any government, including our own, can simply lock out the cars. It's widely known that if you're late on your Tesla payment, the car just stops working. How much harder would it be for the car to just drive itself back to the factory? Or the government tells the car to drive you to a quarantine center the next time we have a pandemic. Even though this may be extremely unlikely or even ridiculous to some people, I'll take a pass. But there are other problems. I saw another article just came out a day ago. 10 facts electric vehicle advocates don't want you to know. This is a quick list. We'll just run through it, and it'll be linked below, but each bullet point has a link in it to give further documentation. 1. EVs are powered by fossil fuels. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, fossil fuel-based power plants, coal, oil, or natural gas, create about 60% of the nation's electrical grid, and nuclear accounts for another 20%. 2. The batteries of EVs rely on cobalt. An estimated 70% of the global supply of cobalt emanates from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. That's a country with deplorable working conditions, especially for children. 3. A study released earlier this year by an environmental group showed that nearly 1/3 of San Francisco's electric charging stations were non-functioning. The population of San Francisco represents roughly 2% of California. 4. Supporters of the California law admit there will be a 40% increase in demand for electricity, adding further strain to the grid and requiring increased costs for power and infrastructure. 5. According to one researcher, the strain of adding an EV is similar to adding 1 or 2 air conditioners to your home, except an EV requires power year-round. 6. Today, 20 million American families, that's about 1 in 6, have fallen behind on their electric bills. It's the highest amount ever. 7. Utility companies will need to add $5,800 in upgrades for each new EV for the next 8 years in order to compensate for the demand power. All customers will shoulder this cost, whether you buy an EV or not. 8. The average price for an electric vehicle is currently $66,000, up more than 13% in the last year, costing an average of $18,000 more than the average combustible engine car. Meanwhile, the median household income is $67,521. For African American families, the average is $45,870, and for Hispanic households, it's $55,321. 9. A 2022 study found that the majority of EV charging occurs at home, leaving those who live in multi-family dwellings, like apartments, at a real disadvantage for charging. 10. The same study also noted that many drivers charge their EVs overnight, when solar power is not available on the grid. Basically, EVs are a horrible idea that is too expensive. It won't solve any problems. It creates additional dependence on foreign countries. Again, and seriously, will be too expensive. This is going to add billions to the cost of infrastructure. Hey, but not to worry. Blank check Biden has already offered $375 billion in federal investment to reduce emissions. Now, $375 billion from the federal government is probably more like $600 billion, and most of it will go to wealthy Biden supporters and do very little to absolutely nothing to solve the problem, even if you believe there is a problem in the first place. Okay, so this is going to happen, and it will make your life worse. But how much worse? And what could possibly happen next to make it worse? When I was writing this, I was going through all the scenarios, trying to game it out like I do. But a gift of a story just fell into my lap. CAISO just issued a desperate warning to all Californians. CAISO? What's that? It stands for the California Independent System Operator. Apparently, it is a giant organization that oversees the operation of California's bulk electric power system, transmission lines, and the electricity market. Well, yesterday, during the peak afternoon heat, temps reached around 100 in several areas, and they issued this warning. Quote, "If weather or grid conditions worsen, the ISO may issue a series of emergency notifications to access additional resources and prepare market participants and the public for potential energy shortages and the need to conserve. End quote. So, a surge in EV charging at home could bring down parts of the state's grid, telling customers to brace for potential blackouts as the state's grid faces capacity constraints over the Labor Day weekend. Now, they also issued another statement. The top 3 conservation actions are set thermostats to 78 degrees or higher, avoid using large appliances and charging electric vehicles, and turn off unnecessary lights. Now, that warning only lasted a few hours until they put out another emergency warning. Officials asked residents to cut back on power use. Wednesday, between 4 and 9 p.m. 4 and 9 p.m., they say. Isn't that when most people are driving home and then immediately plug in their cars to charge overnight? Is it? I'm asking for a friend. Then, 4 hours later, same day, another emergency warning. An official level 1 emergency where they tapped every emergency resource but still couldn't meet demand. There were rolling blackouts. Right now, they can't keep lights or refrigerators on, but they want to double the number of electric vehicles in the next few years. Making predictions is really hard, especially about the future. But this rollout to EVs, and only EVs, is going to be a disaster. I will be spending all of my extra money to make sure my old truck is in perfect working order, with a garage of spare parts. I might look into getting an old diesel that I can convert to running on cooking oil. I don't think fried food is going extinct in this country anytime soon. If there is one piece of info that you didn't know, please subscribe so you can come back tomorrow and learn more. So where are you on this issue? Do you want an EV? Can you afford it? Do you even like them? Will they do anything to fix any problems? And more importantly, how do you feel about the government forcing you to buy a product you may not even want?